The golden autumn light filtered softly through the playground trees, casting dancing shadows across the colorful equipment where children's laughter rang out like tiny bells. A successful CEO in her cream blazer stood watching her 8-year-old daughter on the swing, the child's blonde hair catching the sun as she moved silently through the air. A tall single father approached, his gentle voice greeting the quiet girl with a warm smile. The world seemed to pause as the child's lips parted. And for the first time in her life, she whispered, "Hello." Her mother froze completely, heart pounding, eyes widening in absolute disbelief. Victoria Sterling had built an empire from nothing. Her sharp mind and relentless drive transforming a small startup into a multi-million-dollar tech company. At 34, she commanded boardrooms with the same precision she once used to code through sleepless nights. Her appearance reflected this success. Perfectly platinum blonde hair always pulled into an immaculate bun, designer suits that whispered rather than shouted their price tags, and heels that clicked with authority on marble floors. Yet behind those calculating blue eyes lived a different story, one written in the language of a mother's desperate love for her silent child. Her daughter Emma was everything soft where Victoria was sharp. The girl possessed an ethereal quality, with hair like spun gold that fell in gentle waves past her shoulders, eyes the color of a summer sky, and skin that held the faintest blush of roses. She moved through the world like a ghost child, present but never quite touching it. Her silence, a wall that separated her from everyone except her mother. Teachers described her as brilliant but unreachable. A child who understood everything but gave nothing back in words. The man who had just changed their world stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, his broad shoulders filling out a simple gray hoodie that had seen better days. Marcus Thompson carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had faced real danger and survived. His brown hair was cut short and practical, his jaw shadowed with stubble that suggested he prioritized his 6-year-old son's morning routine over his own grooming. His hands, large and calloused from years of physical work, moved with surprising gentleness when he spoke, painting pictures in the air that somehow made children trust him instantly. Marcus had traded his firefighter's helmet for a whistle 2 years ago, after a beam fell wrong and left him with a back that couldn't handle the physical demands anymore. Now he ran community sports programs, teaching kids to find their voices through movement and play. His son Jake was his opposite in every way where Marcus was calm and measured. Jake bounced through life like a rubber ball, talking to everyone, befriending everything from dogs to doorposts. Their small American city provided the perfect backdrop for this encounter. Neither too large to be impersonal, nor too small to be stifling. The central park where they met stretched for several blocks. Its playground recently renovated with equipment in primary colors that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. Victoria's journey with Emma had begun 8 years ago, in a delivery room where joy turned to concern when the baby didn't cry. The doctors assured her everything was fine physically, that some babies were simply quieter than others. But as months turned to years and Emma never babbled, never called out mama, never even cried with sound, the truth became undeniable. Test after test revealed nothing wrong with her vocal cords. Her hearing was perfect, her intelligence above average. The diagnosis came like a punch to the gut: selective mutism, likely caused by psychological trauma during birth, though no one could explain exactly what or how. The parade of specialists began when Emma turned 3. Speech therapists with their flashcards and exercises, child psychologists with their play therapy and art sessions, even alternative healers with their promises of breakthrough treatments. Victoria spent more on these appointments than most people spent on their mortgages, flying in experts from across the country, trying experimental programs that cost thousands per session. Each failure carved another piece from her heart, watching Emma's eyes dim a little more as another adult gave up on reaching her. School brought fresh wounds. Victoria still remembered the parent-teacher conference where Mrs. Patterson, meaning well, suggested Emma might be better suited for a special needs program. The other children had tried it first, drawn to Emma's pretty face and gentle manner. But kids have little patience for someone who won't play their games properly. They weren't cruel, exactly, just indifferent, which somehow hurt more. Emma ate lunch alone, played alone, existed in a bubble of silence that even the kindest teachers couldn't penetrate. Victoria's response was to build a fortress around her daughter. Private tutors replaced group classes when possible. Playdates were carefully orchestrated and usually abandoned when other mothers ran out of polite conversation about the shy little girl. Weekends meant just the two of them, Victoria reading aloud while Emma drew elaborate pictures, their communication a complex system of gestures, expressions, and the occasional written note. It worked, but it wasn't living. Many nights, Victoria would stand in Emma's doorway, watching her daughter sleep, wondering what dreams played behind those closed eyelids. Did she speak in her dreams? Did she laugh with sound? The silence of the house pressed against Victoria like a weight, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the whisper of wind against windows. She would give anything, absolutely anything, to hear her daughter's voice just once. That particular Thursday afternoon had started like any other. Victoria had cleared her schedule after 3:30, as she always did on Thursdays, to take Emma to the park. It was their routine, sacred and unchangeable. Emma would swing, while Victoria answered emails on her phone, occasionally looking up to wave or smile. The playground was usually busy enough that Emma could watch other children without the pressure of interaction. Marcus and Jake had arrived 10 minutes after them, the boy exploding onto the playground like a small tornado. Victoria noticed them immediately. It was hard not to notice Jake's enthusiastic greeting to every child in sight, including her silent Emma. "Hi, I'm Jake. Want to play astronauts? You can be the alien if you want, or the robot, or another astronaut." The boy's father followed, at a measured pace, clearly used to his son's exuberance. Victoria watched her daughter's reaction carefully. Usually, Emma would shrink back from such direct approach, her body language screaming discomfort. But something about Jake seemed different. Maybe it was that he didn't wait for an answer, just continued chattering while demonstrating his rocket ship technique on the slide. Emma's eyes followed him with what looked almost like curiosity. Then Marcus approached the bench where Victoria sat. "Mind if I sit? My kid has enough energy for 3 playgrounds." His voice was warm, with a slight rasp that suggested years of shouting orders through smoke. Victoria's first instinct was to politely decline, to maintain the barrier she always kept between Emma and strangers. But something in his manner, the way he didn't stare at Emma or ask immediately why she wasn't playing with the others, made her nod instead. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for several minutes, both watching their children. Jake had progressed to the monkey bars, providing running commentary on his adventure across the lava pit. Emma remained on her swing, but Victoria noticed she had stopped moving, her attention fixed on the animated boy. "Your daughter's very observant," Marcus said finally. "Not a question, but a statement. She's cataloging everything, isn't she? How Jake moves, how the other kids respond to him, the whole social dynamic." Victoria turned to look at him sharply. Most people called Emma shy, or special, or, worst of all, different. No one had ever called her observant with such respect. "Most people don't notice that," Victoria replied carefully, her fingers tightening on her phone. Marcus shrugged, his eyes still on the children. "I work with a lot of kids. Some learn by doing, some by watching. The watchers often understand more than we give them credit for." He paused, then added, "Jake's teaching method might be unconventional, but he's actually pretty good at including everyone, even if they don't respond the traditional way." As if to prove his point, Jake had circled back to Emma's swing. "Hey, silent astronaut. Watch this." He proceeded to demonstrate what he called a space jump from the swing, landing with exaggerated moonwalking steps. Emma's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but closer than Victoria had seen with any stranger. Jake seemed to take this as encouragement, continuing his space mission narrative while occasionally glancing at Emma as if she were his co-pilot. The pattern continued for the next 3 days. Marcus and Jake would arrive shortly after Victoria and Emma, the boy immediately launching into whatever adventure occupied his imagination that day. Pirates on Tuesday, deep-sea explorers on Wednesday, dinosaur hunters on Thursday. Each time, he included Emma in his narrative without demanding participation, assigning her roles that required no words. "You're the lookout," he'd announce, or, "You guard the treasure while I fight the shark." Marcus, meanwhile, had taken to bringing 2 cups of coffee from the cafe across the street, wordlessly offering one to Victoria. They would sit in companionable semi-silence, occasionally commenting on the children's play or the weather, nothing deep or probing. Victoria found herself looking forward to these afternoons more than she cared to admit, the simple acceptance in Marcus's presence a relief from the constant explanations and apologies she usually had to make for Emma's silence. On Friday, something shifted. Jake had organized a game with several other children, something involving pretend cooking and a restaurant. He'd assigned Emma the role of taste tester, which required only nodding or shaking her head as the other children presented their sand pies and grass salads. Victoria watched her daughter actually step forward, joining the loose circle of children for the first time. Marcus moved closer to the action, not interfering but positioning himself where all the children could see him. When one boy complained that Emma wasn't saying if the food was good or bad, Marcus casually intervened. Some of the best food critics write their reviews, he suggested, producing a small notebook and pencil from his pocket. Emma, would you like to draw stars for how good each dish is? The transformation was subtle but profound. Emma took the pencil with steady hands and began making careful star ratings for each offering. The other children, seeing this as a new element to their game, became even more engaged, trying to earn more stars. Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion she couldn't quite name. As the game evolved, the children decided they needed a ball to be their special ingredient. They began passing it in a circle, each child supposed to call out what magical power it added to their dish. When it reached Emma, the circle paused. Jake started to skip her, but Marcus stepped in with gentle authority. "Everyone gets a turn," he said simply, then looked at Emma with those steady brown eyes. "What does the magic ball add to the recipe?" The entire playground seemed to hold its breath. Emma looked at the ball in her hands, then at Marcus, then at her mother. Her lips moved slightly, forming shapes without sound. Marcus knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "I'm a little hard of hearing from all those fire truck sirens," he said with a conspiratorial wink. "Could you say it just a bit louder?" The silence stretched like a rubber band pulled to its limit. Victoria found herself leaning forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The other children waited with the natural patience kids sometimes surprise you with. Jake bounced slightly on his toes but didn't speak. Emma's fingers tightened on the ball. She looked directly at Marcus, took a breath that Victoria could see lift her small shoulders, and whispered, "Ball." The word was barely audible, like a leaf touching ground, but it exploded through Victoria like thunder. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears instantly blurring her vision. 8 years of silence broken by one word, one impossibly beautiful word. The children, not understanding the magnitude of the moment, simply continued their game, Jake cheerfully announcing that ball was the perfect magical ingredient. Marcus stood slowly, his eyes finding Victoria's across the playground. He gave the smallest nod, acknowledging what had just happened, while somehow managing not to make it feel like a spectacle. He turned back to the children, keeping the game moving, letting Emma process this moment without pressure. But Victoria saw his hand shake slightly as he brushed it through his hair, saw the emotion he was controlling for all their sakes. The game continued for another 10 minutes, but Victoria absorbed none of it. Her entire being was focused on Emma, who had returned to her quiet observation but seemed somehow lighter, as if speaking that single word had released something trapped inside her. When the other children dispersed to different equipment, Emma walked to her mother with measured steps. Victoria knelt and opened her arms, and Emma stepped into them, allowing herself to be held in a way she usually resisted in public. They stayed like that for a long moment, Victoria's tears falling silently into her daughter's golden hair. When they finally separated, Marcus was standing nearby with Jake, who for once seemed to understand something important had happened, and was relatively still. "Thank you," Victoria managed, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't begin to contain. "I don't think you understand what you just..." 8 years. 8 years of silence. Marcus's expression softened, and she saw then that he did understand, perhaps more than she knew. "Every child has their own timeline," he said quietly. "Sometimes they just need the right key to unlock what's already there." Jake, unable to contain himself any longer, bounced forward. "Emma talked. That's so cool. Maybe tomorrow she can say spaceship. Or dinosaur. Oh. Or maybe Marcus placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. And Jake stopped mid-sentence, though his eyes still sparkled with excitement. Would you like to know why it worked? Marcus asked Victoria, his tone careful. Professional. I mean, if you're interested. I've worked with selective mutism before, though nothing quite this severe. Victoria nodded immediately, desperate to understand, to learn how to recreate this miracle. Marcus gestured to a nearby bench while the children returned to playing, Jake showing Emma his secret hiding spot under the slide. Movement and speech are connected in the brain, he began, his hands illustrating unconsciously as he spoke. When kids are engaged in physical play, especially repetitive activities like passing a ball, it can bypass some of the anxiety blocks that prevent speech. The game created a structure where speaking was just part of the pattern, not a performance. Victoria listened intently, her business mind automatically cataloging the information. But the other therapists tried play therapy, she said, not challenging but seeking to understand. What was different? Marcus considered his words carefully. Most therapy still feels like therapy to kids. They know they're supposed to perform, to meet expectations. This was just play. Emma wasn't a patient who needed to be fixed. She was just a kid in a game who happened to have the ball. He paused, then added, Plus, Jake doesn't treat anyone as different. To him, Emma's always been part of his adventures, whether she spoke or not. That acceptance might have made the difference. They talked for another hour while the children played, Marcus sharing techniques he'd learned, working with traumatized children after fires, Victoria describing their long journey through the medical system. She found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone, about the nights she wondered if she was failing Emma by pushing too hard or not hard enough, about the isolation of raising a child who couldn't tell you what hurt or what helped. Marcus listened with the same steady presence he'd shown with Emma, no judgment, no false promises that everything would be fine. When he mentioned, he ran afternoon sessions at the community center, teaching kids confidence through sports and movement. Victoria heard herself asking if Emma could join before her logical mind could intervene. Of course, Marcus said simply. Tuesday and Thursday, 4 to 5. It's drop-in, no pressure. Parents can stay and watch or grab coffee next door. He smiled slightly. Jake would be thrilled. He's already planning tomorrow's adventure with his new silent astronaut partner. That weekend, Victoria found herself replaying every moment of Friday afternoon, analyzing it with the same intensity she brought to quarterly reports. Emma had returned to silence, but it felt different now, like a choice rather than a prison. Twice, Victoria caught her daughter mouthing words in the mirror, her lips carefully forming shapes without sound. Monday felt endless, Victoria's concentration shattered by hope she was afraid to fully embrace. She left 2 meetings early, delegated more than usual, and found herself watching the clock like a teenager waiting for summer break. When she picked Emma up from school, the teacher mentioned Emma had participated more in class, raising her hand to point at answers on the board instead of sitting passively. Tuesday's session at the community center was a revelation. The space was simple, just a gymnasium with basic equipment, but Marcus had transformed it into an obstacle course that looked like a giant game. 7 or 8 children were already there, Jake's voice rising above the others as he explained the mission to save stuffed animals from various dangers. Marcus greeted them warmly but without fanfare, simply pointing to where Emma could leave her backpack and join when ready. Victoria settled on the bleachers with 2 other parents, both of whom seemed relaxed and happy to chat or sit quietly. The pressure she usually felt in social situations with other parents was absent here. Emma stood at the edge of the group initially, but Jake immediately assigned her a crucial role. Emma's the eagle eye. She spots dangers we can't see. The other children accepted this without question, and soon Emma was pointing at different obstacles, guiding them through Marcus's course. When they needed to call out colors to move forward, Marcus modified the game so Emma could hold up colored cards instead. Halfway through the session, during a water break, one of the younger boys asked Emma directly what her favorite animal was. The familiar panic flashed across Emma's face, but before Victoria could intervene, Marcus smoothly redirected. How about we all draw our favorite animals and see if others can guess? He produced paper and markers as if he'd planned this all along, which, Victoria realized he probably had. The week continued with small victories. Thursday's session involved rhythm exercises where kids copied patterns by clapping or stomping. Emma participated fully, her body learning to communicate in new ways. Marcus never pushed for speech but created countless opportunities where it could happen naturally. Jake remained her fierce champion, translating her gestures to others with surprising accuracy. Friday afternoon at the playground became a celebration of sorts. Jake had convinced several regular playground kids to play Emma's game, which involved elaborate pantomime and dramatic gestures. Watching her daughter actually laugh, silently but with her whole body, at Jake's exaggerated death scene in their pretend battle, Victoria felt something in her chest finally unclench after 8 years of constant tension. "She's finding her way," Marcus said, appearing beside her with the usual coffee. "Every session she's a little braver. Yesterday she actually touched my hand to get my attention instead of just waiting." "That's huge." Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. The gratitude she felt was too large for words, too complex for simple thanks. But success wasn't linear, as the next week proved painfully. Victoria's company was launching a major product, and despite her best intentions, she had to miss Tuesday's session for an emergency board meeting. She sent Emma with the nanny, promising to make Thursday without fail. But Thursday brought a system crash that threatened to derail everything. And again, Victoria had to send apologies through the nanny. Emma's regression was swift and heartbreaking. The light that had begun to shine in her eyes dimmed. She stopped participating in Marcus's sessions, returning to her role as silent observer. Jake tried everything to re-engage her, but Emma had retreated behind her walls, higher and thicker than before. Marcus's text on Friday was polite but pointed. "Emma needs consistency. She needs to know you value her progress as much as your work." Victoria stared at the message, anger flaring initially at his presumption, then crumbling into shame because he was right. She'd done exactly what she swore she never would, chosen work over her daughter's breakthrough moment. She arrived at the playground that afternoon to find Marcus and Jake already there, but the easy warmth was gone from Marcus's eyes. Jake ran to Emma as always, but even he seemed subdued. Victoria approached Marcus, prepared to apologize, but he spoke first. "I get it," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You're a single parent running a company, but Emma doesn't understand quarterly reports or board meetings. She understands that the week she started trusting enough to try, you disappeared." The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Victoria had built her entire life around providing for Emma, but she'd missed the moment when Emma needed presence more than provision. "You're right," Victoria said simply, surprising him. "I failed her. This week, when she needed stability most, I chose wrong." She looked at Emma, sitting alone on the swing, while Jake tried to interest her in his new game. "How do I fix this?" Marcus's expression softened slightly. "You show up, every time, no matter what. And when you absolutely can't, you explain it to her yourself, not through someone else. She needs to know she's your priority. Not in words, but in actions." He paused, then added, "There's a special session tomorrow. Saturday. Just Emma, Jake, and maybe 1 or 2 others. Can you both make it?" Victoria nodded immediately, already mentally canceling her Saturday conference call. "We'll be there." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you really think she'll speak again?" Marcus looked at Emma, then back at Victoria. "She spoke once. That means it's possible. But it has to be on her terms, when she feels safe enough. Our job is to create that safety." Saturday's session was unlike anything Victoria had expected. Marcus had set up what looked like a storytelling circle, with cushions and soft lighting that made the gymnasium feel intimate rather than institutional. Only Jake and 1 other child, a quiet girl named Amy, were there. Marcus explained they would be creating a story together, each person adding 1 part, using whatever communication felt comfortable. Jake began enthusiastically, setting up an elaborate tale about underwater explorers. Amy added details about magical sea creatures. When it came to Emma's turn, Marcus offered her multiple options. She could draw, use gestures, or whisper to Jake, who could speak for her. Emma chose to draw, creating a detailed octopus that the others incorporated into the adventure. The story continued for an hour, weaving back and forth between the children. Victoria watched her daughter slowly relax, her drawings becoming more animated, her body language opening. When Marcus suggested they act out parts of the story, Emma actually stood up, moving her arms like octopus tentacles while Jake narrated dramatically. Then, during a particularly exciting part where they were escaping from a sea monster, Jake dropped the foam ball they were using as a pearl. It rolled to Emma's feet. Without hesitation, she picked it up and held it out to him. "Here," she said clearly, the word cutting through the space, like sunlight through clouds. Jake froze for a second, then beamed. "Thanks, Emma." He continued the game as if nothing monumental had happened, but Victoria saw Marcus's eyes widen, saw Amy's delighted smile. Emma seemed surprised by her own voice, but not scared. She had chosen to speak, not been forced or tricked into it. The session ended with the children drawing pictures of their adventure. Emma drew herself as part of the group, not separate or watching, but participating. When it was time to leave, she walked to Marcus and tugged on his sleeve. He knelt down, and she whispered something Victoria couldn't hear. Marcus nodded seriously, then said, "I'll tell him you said goodbye. He'll be happy to hear it." In the car, Victoria asked carefully, "What did you tell Marcus?" Emma was quiet for so long Victoria thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice rusty from disuse but determined, she said, "Tell Jake, thank you." 3 words. 3 impossible, beautiful words. Victoria pulled into a parking lot and turned to look at her daughter fully. "Emma, I'm so proud of you, and I'm sorry I wasn't there this week when you needed me." Emma looked at her with those wise blue eyes, then reached out and patted her mother's hand, a gesture of forgiveness that made Victoria's eyes burn with tears. The next month brought steady progress. Emma began speaking in whispers to Jake regularly, sometimes to Marcus, occasionally to Amy. She still couldn't manage school or strangers, but within the safe circle of the community center and playground, her voice grew stronger. Victoria rearranged her entire schedule, making Tuesday and Thursday afternoons sacred, turning down meetings worth millions to sit on bleachers and watch her daughter bloom. Marcus and Victoria fell into a rhythm too, coffee conversations becoming dinner plans, always with the kids, but increasingly feeling like something more. He shared his story gradually, the wife who'd left when Jake was 2, unable to handle the uncertainty of a firefighter's life, the injury that ended his career but led him to discover his gift for working with traumatized children. Victoria told him about Emma's father, a brief relationship that ended when he learned about the pregnancy. His absence both a wound and a relief. The crisis came on a Wednesday morning in November. Victoria received a call from school that Emma had locked herself in the bathroom after a group presentation where the teacher had insisted she at least try to speak. By the time Victoria arrived, Emma was in full panic, hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. Victoria's first instinct was to take Emma home, to protect her from the world that demanded too much. But something made her call Marcus instead. He answered immediately, heard the situation, and said simply, "Bring her to the park. Jake and I will meet you there." It was a risk, taking a traumatized child to a public space, but Victoria trusted him. They arrived to find the playground empty except for Marcus and Jake, who was setting up what looked like their very first game, the restaurant with the magic ball. Without any preamble, Jake announced, "We need our taste tester, the galaxy's pickiest food critic." Emma was still shaking, still tear-stained. But Jake's matter-of-fact inclusion reached her. She took her familiar position in the game, and slowly, gradually, her breathing steadied. When the ball came to her, she held it for a long moment. Then, looking directly at her mother, she said in a clear voice, "I want to play again." The sentence hung in the air like a declaration of independence. Not just wanting to play, but wanting to try again. To not let the morning's trauma define her. Victoria felt her knees actually buckle, and Marcus's steadying hand on her elbow was the only thing that kept her upright. They played for an hour, Emma speaking several times within the safety of the game. When it was time for lunch, Jake suggested pizza, and to Victoria's amazement, Emma nodded and said, "Cheese, please." To Marcus, when he asked what kind, 2 words to almost strangers in a public setting. The impossible becoming possible. Over pizza, while the kids drew on their placemats, Marcus said quietly, "She's going to be okay. It won't always be linear, but she's finding her voice." The panic this morning wasn't a setback. It was her fighting against the silence instead of accepting it. Victoria reached across the table and took his hand, not caring who saw. "We couldn't have done this without you. Either of you." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "You would have found another way, but I'm glad it was our way." Jake looked up from his drawing, observed their joined hands, and announced, "Good. Emma needs a dad who understands quiet. And I need a mom who has good snacks. Emma's mom always has those fancy crackers." The adults froze, but Emma looked at Jake, then at their parents' hands, and smiled. Not a half smile or a hidden smile, but a full, radiant expression that transformed her face. "Family," she said. The word careful, but certain. Christmas came with a special kind of magic. Emma could now speak in full sentences to her inner circle, though she still went silent around strangers. The school had finally agreed to an individualized education plan that didn't require verbal participation. Victoria had restructured her company's leadership to allow for more flexibility, and Marcus had started joining them for Sunday dinners, bringing Jake and a comfortable ease that made their unconventional family feel inevitable. The breakthrough everyone had been waiting for came in February, during Jake's 7th birthday party. Emma had helped plan it for weeks, and when it came time to sing happy birthday, her voice joined the chorus. Not loud, not confident, but present. Every parent there understood they were witnessing something special, and not one of them made it awkward by commenting. Later, as Jake opened presents, he saved Emma's for last. She had drawn him an elaborate comic book of all their adventures, each page detailing a different game they'd played. When Jake hugged her, she whispered something in his ear that made him beam. "Emma says, next adventure, she's the narrator," he announced proudly. Spring arrived with possibilities. Marcus and Victoria's relationship had evolved into something neither had expected but both treasured. They were cautious, mindful of their children, but the connection was undeniable. Emma had started speaking to her teachers occasionally, single words but voluntary. Jake had become her fierce protector at school, matter-of-factly explaining to anyone who would listen that Emma talks when she's ready, and if you're nice, she might be ready sooner. The moment that changed everything came on an ordinary Thursday in May. They were at the playground, their usual spot. When Emma climbed to the top of the jungle gym, Victoria watched, always slightly anxious when Emma went high. Marcus stood nearby, ready but not hovering. Jake was digging in the sandbox, building what he claimed was a dinosaur hospital. Emma looked down at all of them, her family and everything but law, and called out in a voice clear as a bell, "Look at me. I'm flying." The words carried across the playground, causing other parents to look up. Victoria's hand flew to her heart. Marcus's face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen. Jake abandoned his dinosaurs to cheer, but Emma wasn't done. As she climbed down, she went to Marcus, tugged on his shirt until he knelt, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Jake's dad. Will you be my dad too?" The playground seemed to stop breathing. Marcus looked at Victoria, who was crying too hard to speak but nodding emphatically. He turned back to Emma and said softly, "I would be honored to be your dad." Jake, never one to be left out of a moment, ran over and added, "And Emma's mom can be my mom. We're getting a whole family." He looked at Emma seriously. "But you have to talk at our wedding. Deal?" Emma considered this, then nodded. "Deal." 6 months later, on a perfect October afternoon, they stood in the same park where it all began. Victoria wore a simple cream dress that moved in the breeze, her hair down for once. Marcus had actually worn a suit, though Jake had already managed to get grass stains on his matching pants. Emma stood between them in a yellow dress she'd chosen herself, holding the rings. When the officiant asked if anyone had any words to share, Emma stepped forward. The small gathering of family and close friends held their breath. She looked at Marcus, then at her mother, then at Jake, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "My mom was sad because I couldn't talk," she began. her voice carrying clearly across the lawn. Marcus and Jake showed us that love doesn't always need words. But now that I have words, I want to say them. She turned to Marcus. Thank you for waiting until I was ready. Thank you for making Mom smile again. Thank you for being my dad, even before I could ask. She turned to Jake. Thank you for being the best brother and never making me feel broken. Finally, she faced her mother. Thank you for never giving up, even when it was hard. I always heard you, even when I couldn't answer. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. Jake, unable to contain himself, shouted, "Group hug," and they collapsed together, a laughing, crying tangle of limbs and love. Emma's laughter, with sound, rang out like the sweetest music Victoria had ever heard. As they stood to exchange vows, Victoria looked at this man who had changed their lives simply by seeing her daughter not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person to be understood. Marcus caught her eye and winked, and she knew he was thinking the same thing she was, that sometimes the best families are the ones that find each other in unexpected places. The ceremony concluded with Jake and Emma releasing butterflies they'd raised themselves. Watching them scatter into the sky, Emma called out, "Fly high, butterflies," her voice confident and clear. As the insects disappeared into the blue, she slipped her hand into Marcus's and her other into her mother's, with Jake holding onto Marcus's other side. Standing there in the golden afternoon light, in the park where a silent girl had found her voice and a broken family had become whole, Victoria realized that some victories couldn't be measured in profit margins or corporate successes. Some victories were measured in words finally spoken, in trust finally given, in love finally received. Emma looked up at her new complete family and said simply, "Home." And it was.